Okay, and I just want to say thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. If everybody could please mute for now, except for Jolene, of course. I am so excited about today's presentation. Jolene and I met, oh my goodness, back in March or April, and have been talking ever since. And I've just been dying to collaborate with Jolene and do something wonderful around gray area drinking. We thought the fact that it is dry January, as we all know, a lot of people talk about the fact that if they can just get through the month and they don't have a problem with alcohol. And then, of course, we watch as people start kind of jumping out the windows and thinking about getting that next drink in February 1st if we cannot come soon enough. So with our kind of theme of dry January, I thought what a great time to have Jolene talk about gray area drinking and her background and what she does. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jolene Park. Jolene is a functional nutritionist, so she goes beyond just a gray area drinking expert. She's a health coach and a TEDx speaker. Since founding her consulting company, Healthy Discoveries, in 2001, she has worked as a corporate wellness consultant, a speaker, and a workshop facilitator. Jolene coaches high-achieving professionals who want to eliminate alcohol and sugar cravings and reduce their anxiety by using real food, high-quality nutrients, and cutting-edge mind-body techniques. In her TEDx talk about gray area drinking, she shares her personal alcohol and anxiety story and explains the importance of replenishing our neurotransmitters and nourishing our nervous system in a comprehensive and consistent way. So following the great impact of her TEDx talk and private coaching, Jolene founded grayareadrinkers.com, which is an online hub and a place for gray area drinkers to get support, for former gray area drinkers to unite, and for coaches to learn Jolene's executive coaching exclusive techniques. So with that, I do just want to introduce myself very quickly. My name is Laura Herman. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Gallus Medical Detox. For any of you that are not familiar with us, we do have 6-bed private pay and out-of-network insurance detoxes in both Arizona as well as Colorado. We are actually about to be growing into Las Vegas, San Antonio, and Dallas. We can do very high levels of acute detoxes. As an example, we can do 300 milligrams of methadone in about 2 weeks. We also do a lot of really great work with a lot of polysubstance. We are white glove concierge service. So we do pick up from the airport, and we have a full-time medical director as well as a clinical director at each one of our programs that works with the client every day. Along with our amazing nursing and tech staff. Each person has their own private bedroom with a flat screen TV, and we treat each person as an individual, which is why we keep them very small to make sure everybody is getting the absolute best care that we can provide and get them ready for their next steps in treatment. So that's why working with Jolene is so interesting, as we see more and more people kind of going down the pathway of trying to discover for themselves what their drinking means to them. So with that, I'm going to shift it over to Jolene and let her take it away. She is going to have time for Q&A. If you could please put your questions into the chat. I am the moderator, so I will then send them over to Jolene so she can answer them. So again, if everyone can just stay on mute and then type in your questions into the chat, we can get going. Jolene, it's all you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, guys. It's so wonderful to be here. I know time is precious, and a community, we're all on phone calls all the time. So I am very honored, and thank you for taking the time to come to this talk. And the first 30 minutes, I'd like to spend some time diving into what is gray area drinking, some different characteristics, some different signs with that, and then pause after about 30 minutes for you all to ask questions, because I'm sure with that much will come up. And then the next 30 minutes, I'll go into kind of some of the solutions, the neurobiology, and kind of now knowing this, what can we do with this? But what I'd love is those of you who are here right now on the call, if you would just put in the chat, I'd love to know kind of who's on the call. If you're a coach, if you're in the healthcare kind of world industry, if not, if you're just, intrigued with this topic and saw Laura or I post about it. So I'd love to just kind of know, professionally, where your background is, or personally where your interest is. And then as you're typing that in the chat, I wanted to share a little bit too, just of how I got here today to be speaking with all of you and doing this webinar. I always, you know, when I hear speakers, I'm kind of like, wait a minute, like, who are you? Why am I listening to you? And so I want to offer that up to you for, you know, I know some of you on the call, but not all of you. And so I wanted to share a bit of my story of, you know, I never thought 10 years ago I would be sitting doing a webinar talking about this topic. So how did I get here? I certified in functional nutrition in 1999 and spent a decade with continuing education in the functional medicine world. So that's heavily where my footing is and my foundation. I was also in line to go to nursing school. So I did all the pre-nursing requisites, wanted to go in as an RN to do health education. This was always kind of my vision and what I love doing the training and the teaching. And I thought, well, I'll put the RN behind my name along with the certified nutritionist and somehow, you know, fall into health education. In the process of waiting to, the wait list in 2004 was long. Everyone was going into nursing school. And in that process, a large medical supply company in Richmond, Virginia found my website and they said, we're looking for someone to come do on-site wellness classes. And we found your website, would you come? And I was like, of course, this is what I want to do. This is amazing. And so I flew out to Richmond, Virginia. It turned into a 7-year contract. And I taught on site with employees a lot of what my TED Talk was about, the Nourish acronym. I'm going to go into that in the second half of this. Kind of that comprehensive view. Yes, it's nutrition, but it's also relaxation and relationships, and kind of that comprehensive health approach was what I was teaching from 2004 to 2011. And I was also drinking. And which, you know, none of it stood out as abnormal or kind of, you know, out of the ordinary. So I was traveling around the country, running my own company as an entrepreneur in health and wellness, which I loved. I still love. I just think, you know, everything health and wellness is so fascinating. I'm a lifelong learner. And I fit into, you know, kind of the book club, which is really the wine club, drinking culture, the girls' night out, that whole thing that looked normal. You know, again, the group of women I hung out with, my friends, never would have picked me out of that group saying Jolene is the heavy drinker in this group. But I, you know, went back and forth with my drinking of saying, okay, I got to like rein this in silently. And then I would stop for a while. And then I'd be like, why? I can be a social drinker. I'm going to go back in and, you know, start drinking again. And I'll get more into that with the characteristics when we look at kind of the gray area drinking profile. But in 2014, I made the personal decision to stop for good. I didn't go to a 12-step program. I didn't go to a treatment center. I just stopped. And I brought in a lot of what I had been teaching, the brain chemistry, the neurotransmitter stuff, what I knew with nutrition. And I just kind of put it together for a bit of a personal protocol for myself. And that first year of not drinking was a quiet year. I wasn't integrating it into I was continuing to do my work, but I, you know, personally wasn't drinking. The second year into not drinking, I was listening, and some of you on the call may know about Laura McCowan and Holly Whitaker and their home podcast. And in 2015, they were really the only podcast out there. Now there's many, but they were the only one out there of two women who were talking about women and drinking in a different way that had ever been spoken about before. And I was listening to that podcast a year into not drinking. Again, I really didn't have a community or you know, anything, but I had that podcast. And I wrote to them and I said, I love this, you know, what you guys are talking about, but I think you're missing a big piece, which is the physiology, the neurobiology, you know, kind of that physical component. And I just thought that email would, you know, fall to the bottom of the inbox. And Holly replied and said, this is great. We want to talk about this. You know, it's something that we haven't talked about. Would you come on the podcast? So I went on to that 5 years ago, 2016. And, you know, talked about what I'm going to share with you kind of in the second half of this training, which again, has always been my foundational work, what I'm really passionate about. And kind of unbeknownst to me, which I didn't expect, it wasn't kind of the objective going on to that podcast. I just wanted to talk about neurotransmitters and, you know, the physiology of the nervous system. And what happened was the doors blew off, literally, my coaching practice, with women coming to me, and my coaching has been full ever since that interview. And what came through was so many women, 35 to 55, saying, your story is my story. And I would always say, you know, I read like Carolyn Knapp's Drinking a Love Story memoir, and I loved her writing, but I was like, I can't, I mean, my memoir is boring. Like, I don't have this kind of drinking story, but I struggled with alcohol. And then when, you know, again, I wasn't kind of thinking, you know, my story was interesting. I was like, let's talk about GABA, let's talk about serotonin. But when I told my story, I had no idea, and it never even crossed my mind when I was drinking. As you know, I'm laying in bed on Saturday morning, completely hungover from a bottle of wine, Googling on Amazon, like, I was looking for memoirs. And it never even crossed my mind that one other person, let alone millions, would have gone through that same thing. And so when I did that interview, my inbox was just flooded then with two different, and this will kind of get into some of the, you know, the characteristics, but the two demographics that really came in was professional women. So attorneys and CEOs of nonprofits and other entrepreneurs, but the other half that came in was the healthcare profession. So other nutritionists, coaches, nurses, therapists, doctors. I worked with an anesthesiologist. So everybody, you know, naturopaths in that whole kind of healthcare industry, because I, you know, sat here and said, I'm a nutritionist, and I was drinking too much. Nobody knew it. And I was performing and showing up and going and working with clients the next day after I drank too much. And through, you know, again, like it just kind of it blew the doors off of so many others, women coming through saying, this is me. So 6 months later, I started my own podcast with Aidan Donnelly Rowley. Some of you may know of that. It's called Editing Our Lives and Our Drinking. Aidan is a mom of 3 young girls. She's married in New York City. She's also an author and identifies very much with that gray area drinking story. We started recording podcasts, so that brought even more visibility. And then about 6 months later, I did my TED Talk on gray area drinking and continued to really kind of, you know, publicly say, I'm a nutritionist. I'm in the health and wellness field. I love everything health and wellness. And what people didn't know is I would use alcohol to turn my brain off at night, to come down from, you know, it didn't even have to be like, oh my gosh, I'm like in a panic attack, but just to come down from all that energy output of the work and, you know, handling through the day. So that's, here I am with that. And thank you, Laura, for inviting me to come on. Also, because of kind of, you know, that story and speaking and then working with clients full time these last 5 years, the other kind of inadvertent thing that has happened is now I have this database that I didn't kind of set out to do, but this database of what does gray area drinking look like? Because I've been working with it and, you know, talking with people. It's what I do every day. I train other coaches and other practitioners who also stopped their gray area drinking. Now they want to learn how to, you know, work with their clients and their patients. So I've acquired, you know, quite a bit of this, you know, it wasn't like an official study, but it's essentially what I have. And so that's what I want to share with you all today and kind of go through some of that and then open it up for questions before we go into the second part. So I just want to scroll through. It looks like a lot of you are in the professional area, which is wonderful. My next question, if you wouldn't mind just putting in the chat, I'm curious for those of you on the call, if gray area drinking is something that you hadn't heard about before as a professional, and you're like, I'm curious, I want to hear more, or if you have seen my TED Talk or heard about it or been aware of it. So give me like a yes or a no. No, you don't really know about it. Yes, you're aware of it. If you could put that in the chat really quick.
What is it? Can't find it.
And so sometimes I'm getting some kind of yeses and nos. Great. No, 30 years in the field. Wonderful. So I want to start there with the definition of gray area drinking. And because of the podcast, I've also done 25 other interviews on other podcasts. NPR in Denver has interviewed me twice. So because of that visibility, the TED Talk, people will often say, you know, Jolene, your term or your definition, or, you know, that it was, I created this hashtag on Instagram, gray area drinking. And so I want to start here that it's not my term. And it is, let's see if I can, do you guys see this, the PubMed page on my screen? Okay, so it's in PubMed and it's in the medical literature. So the gray area of consumption between moderate and risk drinking. Get to the other one here. Negotiate in the gray area between normal social drinking and being a smelly tramp, not my words, it's on PubMed. A quantitative study of people searching for help online to reduce their drinking. And then another article, gray area alcohol consumption in the US dietary guidelines. So in 2011, the dietary guidelines themselves and the CDC, and, you know, there's been articles that classify and use this term gray area drinking. So I didn't come up with it. I didn't hashtag it. It's in the medical literature when you do some searches and take a look at it. But what I've found is using that term, and I'll get to this in a minute about kind of the labeling, that it has really resonated with a lot of professionals, especially, you know, themselves who are struggling, because some of the labels, and I'll talk about that in a minute, has been harder to kind of, you know, wrap their head around. So gray area has been a little softer. It's been a little bit of a invitation to come through the door when thinking about your own personal drinking. So how I define it and look at it is historically and traditionally, there's been kind of these two buckets of how we've looked at alcohol use. So there's the, I say the every now and again drinker versus the more end stage drinker. More traditional terms can be the normie or the alcoholic. You know, there's different ways to kind of term that, rock bottom, social drinker. And again, different terms, language, semantics work better for different people. But the point is that there's two buckets and two buckets only. So it's one or the other you choose. So you're either this quote normal drinker, every now and again drinker, or you're an alcoholic and you can't handle alcohol. But what's in the middle is this big gray area. And I certainly know people who are every now and again drinkers who have a drink every once in a while, like every couple months. I mean, I'm not talking, you know, a drink a couple times a week. It really is every now and again. I know people like that. I also know people who they themselves are very comfortable and identify as an alcoholic, have had, you know, where it's the medical side. I mean, their liver enzymes, they were going into cirrhosis. You know, I know that too. But honestly, it's not a lot in either one of those buckets. But who I do know is a lot of people in between those two buckets in this gray area, which is where I, you know, feel that I fell, and so many, you know, women that reach out to me and that I work with feel they're in that same area. So often clients who are coming to me and want to work with me one-on-one, many times they'll start the conversation saying, I function really well. I function really well. They want to make that very clear with me that they function really well. And I'm like, I know you do. That's why we're talking. You know, I did too. But, you know, the point is not to get to a place where you don't function well. And the American Cancer Society put out last summer that there is no safe or recommended intake of alcohol. You know, their recommendation is, you know, for optimal health is to not drink. And we know that there's 7 cancers connected with alcohol and, you know, all of these different pieces. And so again, this idea of there's a group that can handle alcohol and a group that can't handle alcohol. There's so much of a spectrum, which we know, the alcohol use disorder spectrum, but this gray area. And so I wanted to, you know, I get tons and tons of emails and comments, and then even just, you know, talking with clients and things. But I pulled a couple that I wanted to read. And this was one of our listeners from our podcast. And she said, again, always qualifying, grayer drinkers will start with this. I was not a rock bottom. I'm not sure I'd ever, you know, have gone there, but I can see how it could happen. And I did not have a good relationship with alcohol. So saying no was just so difficult at times, and I was getting so good at justifying it. I would wake up at night, unable to go back to sleep, and beat myself up for drinking too much. But during the day, I could bounce right back and be high functioning, even feel good for a while. But I knew it wasn't good for me. And then I'd be ready for a glass of wine by 5 o'clock. Quitting scared the hell out of me, but I'm on this journey and I feel strong and confident I can do this. So I get messages like that so many times, and everyone will use kind of a different way to describe it, but it's that similar description of, I don't identify as an alcoholic. I don't have a rock bottom, nothing bad kind of externally that I can hold up and show you and say, look, this happened, therefore, I have this really catastrophic relationship with alcohol. But the gray area often is very internal. So just because there isn't kind of that external, it's that internal. And I've written about that, and many of my clients will say it's that I was just going to have one drink, and then I had way more than I wanted. And at 3 a.m, I woke up, it's that pounding heart, my, parched, I feel nauseous. And I'm going to get up and get myself out of bed, sweat it out at 5 a.m, get to the gym. I show up at my job, take care of the kids, resolve that morning, like I can't keep doing this. And it's 5 o'clock and do it again. And so often there isn't the DUI. There isn't kind of that external, they're pulling it off. And, so, kind of who it is. One thing that I often say is, I drank like most women around me today drink. And people pretty much get that when I say that. So it's not an invisible kind of like, oh, those people. It's our friends, it's our colleagues, it's our family. It may be you, on this call. It's where it's like we're not wanting to drink too much and then drink too much. But even with the drinking too much externally, nobody really sees it or notices it. And that's also another piece of, so many gray area drinkers will say, my husband, my spouse, my partner, like, you worry about this too much. Like, just give yourself a break. I mean, just, you don't have a problem. It's not like you're that bad or you're like an alcoholic or anything. So there's even that external feedback, and even from practitioners. I talk about this a lot online as well, that clients will go to their therapist, go to their doctor and bring up drinking. And the practitioner will say, oh, a glass or two is fine to take the edge off. It's good for your heart. And it's confusing because there's this internal struggle that is going on constantly, often for years, of like, I don't want to drink like this. I'm going to pull back. They do pull back. And then there's that external, like, you don't have a problem. Like, so it's this vicious kind of merry-go-round is kind of the profile of what a gray area drinker looks like. So who's at risk? Women. So I have men clients, but it's very, this type of drinking really, really impacts just our modern day woman. The 35 to 55 is my client base. And why I think we live in a different time in history. I mean, obviously with everything that's happening now, but even before the pandemic and things. And the statistics are also showing that pandemic drinking has gone up, and with women it's gone up 41%. So we knew even before 2020 that there was a rise in women and drinking. And, I think it's just that trying to balance everything, take home fry the bacon, that whole thing, hold down the job. Again, many of my clients have very impressive job titles, very impressive positions. And some of them are the primary breadwinner, and they've got their children and they're managing that. And they'll say, it's like, my husband's great. I mean, I've got this house, I've got this, but I'm drinking a bottle of wine every night. And so it's that kind of juggling piece. And the other thing that goes in with that characteristic and kind of the risk is high achieving. And so I say this, that I work with high achieving professionals, and I really, really do. And I see other, it's becoming a bit of the marketing thing now, I think, of, gray area drinkers. And I work with high achieving gray area drinkers. But I want to break that down because that's not just marketing. It really is part of the characteristic and the demographic. So what I see, talking with so many clients and getting their case studies is this high achieving thing isn't necessarily, an immediate like, oh, well, they can handle alcohol, or a hierarchy, or they're good people because they achieve, and people who don't achieve, or not. It's not that. there's a real dynamic, and this goes into the trauma side of things, the developmental trauma. So when I hear the stories, often, and we can all identify, there's developmental trauma, there's shock trauma. It's a big part of this, the conversation now with neuroscience. And with gray area drinkers, I see everybody has their own story. There's always exceptions. There's no absolutes. But I will say there's often a story in early development where there's a real pressure to perform. The families they grew up in, the achievement, and caring a lot, that it was almost kind of an unspoken. And if you're familiar with the adult children of alcoholic characteristics, I find those characteristics cross over with gray area drinkers a lot. Can be very hard on ourselves, carrying a lot of responsibility, judging ourselves, not really having that model or permission to have a break. Again, my clients are, they were the best in their class, and they went to college and top of their, and became physicians. And it's it's the achieving to the fault where, gray area drinkers will say, the glass of wine is my reward at the end of the day. And so when I say high achieving, it's, again, when we dig into it, there's something there that we need to really take account with. And the other side of it too is loss is always in the story with gray area drinkers. And yes, they're functioning, yes, they're managing, but often where drinking, peaks is a loss of a marriage, a loss of a child, a miscarriage, a divorce. They left their career to go home to take care of the kids, a loss of a parent. And I had a male client who he was on the trajectory to go into professional baseball and playing in college, and had an injury that stopped everything. And that's where his alcohol use began. So he was didn't drink because he was the athlete, and was, and a lot of people too, that'll be their story. Like grad school, my, nose to the grindstone, my head was down. I was, on this course, or law school, I really didn't drink. In college, I was competing to be an athlete. I really didn't drink. And then something shifted, the sudden loss of a parent, so there's that achievement piece, which is, I can see the developmental trauma, which is that attempt to regulate the nervous system, because there's never been a model or permission of how to regulate and cope. And then the loss, often in adulthood. So those are a couple of the risks, and also the characteristics, which I'm sure most everybody on this call can identify with. I mean, I can identify with. So it's no shame, no blame. Again, it's not about kind of like, oh, well, you're in that bucket or they're in that bucket. I think it's just giving voice to what's actually going on. And of course, our nervous system gets dysregulated. And so it's really interesting to me then of why some people reach to cigarettes or pot or alcohol or sugar or obsessive exercise. It's all that attempt to regulate their nervous system. And I've gotten to a point, obviously, of talking about this, that my personal story, I have no shame about it. There was, I was always a very anxious person. I certainly fit into that profile of, there wasn't the abuse or violence in my family, but, there wasn't kind of that emotional holding or nurturing. And so of course that anxiety of like, how do I hold myself and how do I stay with myself? I feel so anxious because I don't really kind of feel like somebody kind of has my back. And so, yes, it makes sense then of why our nervous systems are looking for substances to regulate and to balance. So I want to do a couple more characteristics, and then I want to take some questions on this. But another big characteristic of gray area drinking is back and forth drinking. And this is a big, so I train coaches and practitioners, and we go through a 7-week training. There's so much to dig into, with all of these pieces, and especially when doing, kind of a first session or assessing gray area drinkers. It's very different than motivational interviewing or kind of typical, health coaching questions. There's many questions, but the first and what I feel is the most important to really kind of identify a gray area drinker is the question, not how much do you drink, but the question of Have you had a period of time? What's the longest period of time you've gone where you haven't drank? And how the person answers that question gives you incredible data as a practitioner, as a coach. So most people are very used to how much do you drink? One or two. It just kind of rolls off our tongue, one or two, or maybe a little bit more than I should sometimes. And then the conversation just goes on. But when you ask somebody, when's the last, time, or has there been a period that you haven't drank? You're going to get a very truthful answer. And so what I hear from people, sometimes is, there really hasn't been. I didn't drink through my pregnancies, but as soon as I, gave birth, I was drinking again. I don't want to hear that if I'm going to take somebody on as a client. What I want to hear is, last year I did this 8-month, there's so many different things online right now, or I was doing a yoga training. And so from February to October, I didn't drink. And then I started drinking again around Thanksgiving. And I just felt like it was so great, that period that I didn't drink. And I want to get back to that. Or maybe 3 years ago, somebody might have gone to AA for 6 months. And so I want to hear that, because it tells me two things. It tells me they're a gray area drinker, because if you're thinking about drinking and thinking of it, you're having these starts and stops. So every now and again, drinkers, they're basically stopped most of the time. So they're not going to be doing that. And farther down the spectrum, it's, harder to. And that's the other thing that this tells me, is they have the agency to stop. So they have that ability and capacity, which is a very high, like a number one characteristic of gray area drinkers, is they can stop drinking. It doesn't mean they don't have a problem with drinking. They do. They're on that spectrum. But do they have the ability to stop, or has it gone farther down the spectrum where that ability then isn't there? No shame, no blame. I'm not putting buckets here. We're just looking at what's the physiology capacity at this point, because of alcohol being in the physiology. As a coach and as I train other coaches and work in this, I have no hesitation, and I do not dance around referring people to treatment. That's, how Laura and I work together. So I do not, shy away from that. And it's also very revealing, and it's very good data if somebody cannot go 30 days and not drink. So that's a criteria, that I look at, is, does the person have that ability to stop drinking, and are they in that back and forth kind of area? And if they've had that imprint in their body, they've had that experience, then working with them as a coach and going through what I'm going to talk about next is much, because if alcohol's in there, it's the push and pull. So if they take it out. And then finally, what I want to say is the labels. So often gray area drinkers have a hesitation and resistance to the alcoholic label, to recovery, to sobriety, to those labels. And different language works for different people. For me, this work is not about, you drink, so you're a gray area drinker, or, you're a problem. It's not pointing the finger, but it's opening the door, because so many people will say, I didn't feel comfortable, and I feel like I'm an alcoholic, but I know that, drinking is a problem, and I've been quietly struggling with it. So it's opening the door, and it's the invitation that there's a place at the table for you with this conversation. And one of my coaches just recently posted this, and she went through my training. She hasn't drank for 2 years. She identifies as a former gray area drinker. And this is something she posted on her Instagram just this week. And she said, if I'd had to call myself an alcoholic to get sober, I have to admit, I probably never would have gotten sober. So it's not to say that gray area drinking is not a problem. It is. That's why I quit drinking. The way I was drinking was a problem. I know if I go back to drinking, I know exactly where I'll be very quickly. But it's also not kind of, if somebody needs treatment, then I'm not going to kind of dance around or step away from that either. I recommend treatment. So a couple signs. Gray area drinkers silently worry, regret, and fret about their drinking, often for years, and they don't talk about it. So clients will say to me, my friends are fine. Like they can drink. I don't know how they can do it. And I'm like, I wouldn't so quickly assume that, they're doing okay. They're just not talking to you about what's happening at 3 a.m. and their inner struggle that's going on. So it's a real silent inner experience often. They drink between two extremes. So they drink, that it can be a real blowout of binge drinking, and then they can stop. So it's that back and forth. They can stop drinking. They have stopped for periods of time, often weeks or months. It's a huge characteristic. Their drinking often doesn't look problematic to those around them, and they ricochet between ignoring that still small voice inside, telling them to stop drinking, and then deciding that they're overthinking it and they just need to live a little and, just moderate, which I would do all the time. Of just like, I just want to be a social drinker. I just want to be able to have a glass of wine. I'd go back to drinking. Same thing would quickly progress, and I'd go right back to the same place. And it was that back and forth over so many years that in December 14th, I just said, I'm stopping for good. So I'd love to, I know that was a lot, and whatever kind of questions you have on that, any comments, did that trigger anything, bring anything up? I'd be happy to answer some questions at this point.
I was just going to say, that's really validating the way that you described it, because I guess I was a gray area drinker and didn't really define it as such, and had to quit drinking because I wasn't out of control. I wasn't an alcoholic or anything, but it was problematic. I was functional, everything was fine, but I was drinking because I didn't like my boss at the time, and, would come home and make margaritas for myself, and had sleeping issues and woke up in the middle of the night and felt like crap. And it was just a problem. And my partner would be like, why are you drinking 3 margaritas every night? And I was like, it's no big deal. Leave me alone. And then I quit drinking, and people were like, I can't, you're quitting drinking? That's so weird. Why are you quitting drinking? You obviously don't have a drinking problem. And it was such a weird thing. And people were so, like, I'm not sober. And people were thinking that it was such a strange thing for me to do. And now it makes a lot of sense. So thank you. I appreciate that validation.
Thank you for sharing. That is the, the story over and over. That's so common. Yeah.
And I've actually found that now I quit drinking many years ago. And I found now that I maybe twice a year, 3 times a year, if I'm out with friends, I could have a beer or 2 beers, and then it's fine. And I don't fall back into that pattern. But it's really very rare that I would drink alcohol at all. And most social situations where other people are drinking, I just don't. I know what happens. I get migraines. I can't sleep, and I'd rather not have those. It's the same if I eat gluten. I don't feel well, so I'm just gonna avoid it. I could eat it. I choose not to. So yeah, it's a great thing that I've chosen for myself. But yeah, it's very validating hearing all these things that go into it, and it is really what my experience was. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. I know you talked a lot about it's very prevalent in women, and you talk about like high functioning women, maybe successful women. Do you work with? I imagine there's a lot of men that probably struggle with this, but do you specifically work with men? And then have you seen a correlation in like certain groups of people, say like LGBTQ plus community? Have you any like correlation there?
Yeah, great question. So I do work with men, but the majority of my practice is 98% women. It's just for whatever reason, what's drawn in. But I've had some men, and they fall into that same high achieving. Again, their job titles are impressive. And they're ready to go. When they show up ready to coach with me, it's that kind of linear, like, let's do this, just tell me what to do. So I like working with men, but the majority of my practice is women. And I admittedly, it's white women. So again, within, you know, and I admit that coming from it's that white privilege side. But what I want to say from that too is it does reflect the ACE study. So are you guys like head nod familiar with the ACE study? So thumbs up. So the ACE study, if you're not familiar with it, it's the biggest public health study in the history of this country. And it was done in the mid 90s in San Diego with Kaiser Permanente. Really fascinating, lots to look into. And Nadine Burke is a pediatrician in California, and she did a TED talk on it. So I would recommend Googling Nadine Burke, who is a Black woman and a pediatrician, and gave just an excellent overview in her 15-minute TED talk about the ACE study. But what it was really quickly is it was originally a weight loss study run by a medical doctor at Kaiser, and kind of the Biggest Loser before the Biggest Loser was on TV. And people were losing, 100 pounds or more in a year, and very successful. They went through the whole lifestyle thing, the nutrition, whatever. And then there was a segment that was gaining weight back, everything they lost and more very quickly. So the lead medical doctor started doing a little sociological study and interviewing, saying what's happening here? Like, how much did you weigh when you were born? How much did you weigh, when you were 12? How much did you weigh at your first sexual experience? And he flipped that and said, how old were you? Not how much did you weigh? And the first person he asked, she said, I was 11, and she burst into tears. And he was like, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't what I meant to ask. And what he started uncovering was sexual abuse connected with weight, which I'd known as a nutritionist. I knew that correlation with obesity and abuse. And so it's a longer story, but what happened was he met up with another epidemiologist from the CDC. They put together a really robust epidemiology study. They brought in 17,000 people from Kaiser, patients, and started looking at this and the correlation with early adversity. So early emotional neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, divorce, substance abuse. So there's 10 questions of what was going on in the environment from 0 to 18. And it started with sexual abuse, but went into these other factors as well. The long story of why I tell that story is that population that they brought into that ACE study was white, upper middle class, college educated, health insurance. They were under Kaiser, and the trauma was there. It was high. It wasn't those people in the zip code. And I know, again, I'm want to be very sensitive to, I think what we're looking at right now with the racial pieces and all of that. But what we know from the public health study, there's a big problem in the white community, the upper middle class, with trauma and with substance abuse that we can't ignore. Yes, we need to be working with the other populations, and many people are doing that, and it's wonderful. But we can't just assume that this white, upper middle class population is just like, oh, they're good because they're white. They're not. And that's where a lot of the heavy drinking is, and that's where my clients are. So I don't know if that was kind of the answer you expected, but that's how I kind of look at this.
Yeah, well, I've heard that study referenced in a few different talks. My passion is working with eating disorders. I actually work for the Eating Recovery Center, and I work for in mental health. But I've heard that reference before. So I think that, that does answer my question. Actually added a little more to it. So thank you.
Yeah. It's kind of what I caution about like high achieving. It's like, oh, they're good. They can get away with it. They don't have a problem. And what I want to come back to is, no, this is exactly who has the problem. And, there's a lot going on here that affects, family health, community health, global health, that, this population, we can't just kind of assume because, everybody's good. They're not. Is there another question? If you have something, feel free to type it in the chat.
So Jolene,
Yeah.
can you hear me? This is Mary. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I've been in the drug and alcohol field for 35 years. I'm a nurse and a family therapist, and I just retired about a year ago. But everything you're saying doesn't seem new to me at all. We've been saying this for years. We probably called it early problem drinking, stuff like that. And so I think maybe what's getting, maybe because of your way you describe it, is that we're now taking away some of the stigma by saying gray drinking. And by taking that away, we can go beyond that and say, well, let's see what happens when you don't drink, and let's look at the rest of your life. But I'm not hearing anything different, especially upper white population, overachievers, all of that's all been around forever. I'm just wondering, what do you think is going on now that maybe it's safer to see you as a coach instead of going to your first AA meeting and being freaked out, you know? And that's what we probably need to start really marketing, is to take away the stigma of it. And that if you have a problem, here's early stages and here's later. You know what I'm saying?
Totally. Yeah. And this is the conversation. I mean, I love this. And this is what it's about. And so what I saw happen, so it was online, and it was around 2013. There was this segment of people, we didn't know each other. So there's two guys in the UK, and they founded this, it's called 1 Year No Beer. So, and I've met them and got to know them, and they were working as oil brokers in the city of London. And, as a broker, you take your client out, it's the UK culture, the pub. I mean, they throw those beers back. And they stopped drinking. And so then they started this thing of, 1 Year No Beer, started a Facebook group, and kind of this for the health of it. Like, let's start meditating and do like a 30-day exercise. And exactly what you're saying, it was like the language started to change. And then Holly and Laura started their podcast 2014. And Laura stopped drinking, I think like September 14th. I didn't know her then. I stopped drinking December 14th. Another person who was really influential was Annie Grace, and she wrote the book, This Naked Mind. She is here in Colorado. She and I stopped drinking the same day. We didn't know each other. So it's interesting and weird to me of like, it was like this kind of, it's like the 100th monkey thing, if you've heard that.
Right.
Where for some reason, it was like this tipping of consciousness in a way that we'd kind of been going along for 30, 40 years of, here's the cycle of addiction, and here's the stages, and here's the, the alcoholic, but then all this, it's like there were all of us, and that didn't resonate, and it pushed people away. And then for some reason, this tipped. And then the books started happening, and the podcast started happening. And so there's this huge online, Instagram and Facebook groups, and like, my coach said, she said, if I had to call myself an alcoholic, I wouldn't have stopped drinking. And I really believe, I don't know what the numbers are at this point, tens of thousands, maybe into, a million between the UK, Australia, Canada, the US. But yes, what you're saying, and yes, it's not about going out and saying everybody's a gray area drinker, everybody stop drinking and you have a problem. Not at all. It's about opening the door for those who are nodding, saying, that's me. And I didn't realize there was this conversation, and it's come on in, you're welcome at the table. And then the other piece is what I want to talk about now too, which I think is important, of framing, because gray area drinkers, they're listening to the podcast, reading the books, they're very health and wellness savvy, they're going to the retreats, and they want something new, and they love the neurobiology, they love the physiology. And that's also a really safe and intriguing entryway versus I'm going to sit in a circle. And I'm not against AA. And I'll tell you, the neurobiology of why the community is helpful, but it's about finding kind of that resonance that's that in for people in a newer way. But you're exactly right. It's still the same thing we've been talking about for 30 years.
Right. What is interesting now, is I noticed probably the same time that you're mentioning, all my nurse practitioner friends, like it's creeping in that they'll ask on the health screening, have you tried going without drinking for January? And that'll pop up now as a possible trigger. So I think it's maybe in some good ways, it's spreading out into the community, because I used to get all referrals like, well, go see Mary, she'll tell you whether you're an alcoholic or not. And I say, no, I'm not telling you whether you are or not. I'm saying, do you have a problem? let's look at some changes in your diet and everything. And then I used to do a lot of admissions too. If you are really an alcoholic, here's what we need to look at. But even then, it always like, well, let's see what happens when you do such and such. And then they self-diagnose.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments or questions on that? So I'd like to now jump into kind of the, well, now what? So now we know this. And so what do we do with this? And I was going to do a PowerPoint, but I think I'm just going to keep talking. You guys okay with that? I was going to kind of do to hold the spots, but I'll just talk through them. I want to talk about my Nourish acronym. And so again, I've been teaching this side of things since 2004 because I'm fascinated with it, even though I drank through that. So, you know, this idea that just because we eat right doesn't mean we're healthy. And as a nutritionist, I love nutrition and focusing on nutrition, but I've always kind of looked at this, there's the bigger comprehensive piece. So what's happening with relationships and our sleep and our emotions and even our finances. You know, the money, the relationship and food piece are very intricately connected, as is, you know, and the alcohol can go in there too. It just becomes this spiral. And so I've always been very interested in that comprehensive approach. In 2012, I started learning about the somatic side of things and the trauma. And that fight, flight, freeze kind of neurobiology, the polyvagal nerve, the gut-brain connection. I mean, I already knew about, you know, gut bacteria, but then the connection to the brain. And I was hooked with that. And so, you know, this is the interesting piece is a lot of clients come into me for the nutrition because it's sexy and fun. And, you know, it's like, ooh, I want neurotransmitters. And that's certainly where I started myself with my protocol, my first 30 days of not drinking. And what I feel like really sustained me and really like, once I knew that information, I stopped drinking 2 years later. So I knew neurotransmitters in 2006. I learned the somatic trauma side in 2012, and I stopped drinking in 2014, and I've never gone back. So this idea of the self-regulation, you know, the nervous system is throughout the body. And the neuroscience, I've studied with Bessel van der Kolk, I've studied with Gabor Mate, I've done some of their in-person workshops. My somatic teacher who introduced this to me, she's a yoga teacher and a therapist, and she studied with Peter Levine. So that's been kind of the umbrella of where this entered my life about 8 years ago. And, you know, that teaching, those philosophies come from the bottom up, not top down. And so the thinking and the philosophy is you start with the body, which is fascinating to me as a nutritionist, because when we're working with food and supplements, we're working with the body. But even then going into this more emotional trauma side, it's still the body. So when the body is calm and the body is regulated, the message goes up the spinal cord that the brain can be calm and regulated. And so often reaching, you know, for alcohol, we're not feeling regulated. We're not feeling calm. So many my clients will identify as anxious women. You know, I feel they struggle with that anxiety, and admittedly then, and that was me, reach to a glass of wine, screw it, I'll have another glass, I'll just drink the bottle. And it works initially in those 10, 20 minutes with the anxiety, but it just becomes this awful spiral. So I'd like to just kind of, you know, go through some of this, more of the comprehensive approach. This is a 7-week training, by the way, but I want to give you a couple tidbits. And where I'd like to start with the regulating the nervous system before I start talking about it is to give you an opportunity to experience it, because this is very much experiential work. And, you know, it's called somatic experiencing, so body experiencing. So if you're willing and able to place both feet on the floor, I'd invite you to do that right now. And whether you have on shoes or socks or bare feet, it doesn't matter, but notice the floor under your feet. It might be carpet, might be hardwood, tile, cement. Just Notice the surface of the floor right now under your feet. And then also notice the surface on whatever you're sitting on. Notice what that surface feels like on the back of your legs. And really let your sits bones just sink down into the chair. Notice how it's got you, it's holding you. And then bring your attention to the middle of both feet. And imagine that there's like a bungee cord in the center of both feet that drops down into the floor, goes through the house or the building, and it drops deep into the earth, and then it goes even deeper. And it anchors right there at the earth, and it's holding your feet to the floor, kind of like super glue. And notice if anything in your body is clenching, like maybe your thighs are clenched. See if you can relax and let that go. Maybe your belly or your lower back was clenched, or your shoulders. Notice what the floor feels like on the bottom of your feet, as your feet are anchored there. And then just let your breath do what it wants to do here. So when we're anxious or our head is whirling with worry or the next thing this afternoon, the body loses its feeling of being grounded, which is just a feeling of being calm. And so it can sound esoteric, but it's very practical. And the way to ground the nervous system is to notice what the ground under your feet or under your sits bones, what that sensation feels like at any one time. And then let that go for a minute, just kind of interrupt that and look around the space and the place that you're in. And notice if you see spaces where there's more shadow or more light. Notice what colors are in your space. And then notice if you hear anything other than my voice. And notice if you smell something. You may not, but there might be a scent in your space. Just notice what that scent is. And do you have a lingering taste in your mouth? Have you recently eaten something? What's that taste that's lingering? Or if you've had something to drink, some gum or brushed your teeth, just notice that taste. And then the final piece is touch. So you can just kind of, whatever you're wearing, just notice how that fabric feels on your arm, or you can pat your arm, your shoulder down to your hand. So feeling the ground beneath us, whether it's your hands, your feet, your butt in the chair, gives the message to your nervous system that there's a grounding, which the body can interpret that as a calm when it feels the ground, the anchor. And then coming back to our five senses, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you taste? What's touching you? I forget. Hear, taste, touch, sound, sight. Yeah, so when you looked around. Thank you. So when we're feeling frantic, dysregulated, coming back to our senses can be an entryway into helping the nervous system feel some sense of regulation without reaching for an outside substance. So clients often love this exercise because they can do it standing in the grocery store line. They can do it, laying in bed before they go to sleep. They can do it at that 5 o'clock witching hour when they're like, this is the moment. Oh my God, I really want to have a drink. Feel the ground. And when we look, what do we see, hear, taste, touch, because our mind is usually back in the past or it's jumping ahead to the future. And so when we see, it's like I can see this red chair here in my office, present moment, which also, sounds really good. Be here now, get in the present moment. Sounds great. But how you do it is you come back to your senses. I see a red chair. I can hear the saw down the street whirling outside my window. There's construction down there. So that's present, what's happening right here, right now. So that's some of the kind of that just basic regulating to come back to the nervous system. But then there's, these different pieces, which I've taken my wellness wheel and I put it into a nourish acronym for those of you who saw my TED talk. Nourish sticking with my foundation of nutrition. And the acronym is N stands for notice nature. And I'll give you an example of each of these things. O stands for observe your breath. U, unite with others. NOUR. R is replenish with food. I, initiate movement. S, sit in stillness. And H, harness creativity. So it's this kind of bigger picture of the valuable kind of vital nutrients of community, relaxation, what we're eating, how we're moving, some stillness, whether that's a spiritual devotion or practice or meditation from kind of a relaxation standpoint, a creative outlet using our hands. We know that has that direct connection right up to the brain. So it's that comprehensive approach for you as a practitioner. This isn't just like do as I say, not what I do, my client, go do this. I'm a big believer in kind of that physician heal thyself. So, doing it ourselves first, experiencing it ourselves from that self-care, burnout, compassion, fatigue side of things. And it also goes back very much, a big thing of how I work with clients is, did you like it? Because with the achieving kind of personality, so many gray area drinkers, they'll start talking to me and they're like, oh yeah, I've done therapy for years. And I've seen therapists off and on. I do my Peloton every morning. I do yoga. They list off their achievements. And I'm like, that's amazing. Do you like it? And they stop for a minute because this is that disconnect of having kind of that permission and that model of what does feel good, because the pattern has been, I just keep pushing through and I just shoulder through and I just keep going. And then the reward is the alcohol. Like that's culturally what I've had permission as a way to relax or have fun. But when you really ask gray area drinkers, what's fun? It's a really hard question to answer. And so we back it up of how do you even know if something's fun? Because when we drink, it just anesthetizes us and it numbs us, which, I was going after. That was an effect that I wanted. But then the effect of like, how does it really feel to experience fun? And I don't even know where to begin, but how the client will say, I don't even know where to begin. We start with calming the nervous system, grounding, orienting into present time. And then when information comes in, I picked up a paintbrush and put some paint on a paper. Did I like it? When I'm more grounded and more oriented, I can be like, actually, I didn't. Like, no, it's not my thing. Totally fine. Like I say to my clients all the time, this is not about getting a gold star from me or checking the box or me being in this role of like the parent or the teacher of like you getting the gold kind of A+. It doesn't hurt my feelings at all. And in fact, I really want that, like I did this and I didn't like it. And I'm like, that's amazing. That's awesome that there was that, again, it's the body experiencing, nope, not my thing. So there's gray area drinkers would be like, oh, I do yoga and I meditate. I'm like, do you like it? I'm like, I mean, it's what you're supposed to do. It's like, no, you're not supposed to do anything. If you don't like to meditate, don't meditate. And they're like, really? Yes. because we're looking for the effect. Alcohol gives us an effect. And so now this work, when people they've made the decision, they've stopped drinking, they're able to continue to stop drinking. There's so much now to rebuild, repair, rewire in that neuroplasticity. And the body's looking for these pieces that feel good. That's why we drink. No shame, no blame. So when you try a supplement, B12, what happens? You know, this is Bessel van der Kolk stuff of notice what happens next. So, and that could be another thing of like, oh, you know, I eat this, this, and this. Like, it can be really rigid sometimes with food. What happens when you do that? Well, I don't know. It's just like, I've got it. It's part of that, like, it's like, again, so it's giving the permission of really starting to notice and build and expand out this toolkit of what works and what doesn't work. But the way to know that is not in our head, it's in our body. So ground yourself, orient yourself. So noticing nature, you know, there's all kinds of research on this, the blue mind, about the power of the ocean, the water, the negative ions, just getting into a bath. Can, you know, here in Colorado, unfortunately, we don't have an ocean, to my big dismay. I wish we did. But any kind of moving water, a shower, a bath, and you know, I know people who, I have a friend here in Denver, and she says, basically my whole first year of not drinking, I was a mermaid. She's like, I would take a bath 3 times a day. And she loved it. And she just let herself that, you know, and it's, again, let's follow that thread of what really works. But water can be very soothing to the nervous system. There is a book called Blue Mind that talks all about that. There's the concept, you probably have heard of it, of forest bathing. It's a Japanese kind of theory, but, you know, being in the trees, being among kind of the green, trees are alive themselves, and it impacts in a really positive way our nervous system. So nature, bare feet on the ground for the nervous system. And I find going back to these basics with clients is the thing that they love. And the thing that's been missing. Like, we want the shiny thing and kind of the next thing. And it's just sometimes putting your feet in dirt can, for some people, can be like, that really helped. I had a client, and that was just one of her follow through action steps every day. Somebody else could go put their feet in dirt and be like, I don't get it. That's fine. So we want to really follow that. The other thing about noticing nature is noticing our inner nature with emotions. And tracking kind of, you know, where our emotions are, and being able to name how are you right now? Are you annoyed? You know, are you content? Are you relaxed? Are you excited? And so when we can kind of, the external nature can be a reflection and a metaphor for our internal nature. When the leaves are bare on the trees, you know, versus like the flowers are blooming in the spring, like kind of what's blooming for us emotionally. Where do we need to just kind of emotionally rest and hibernate during the winter? So I work with some of those concepts of noticing nature outside of us and inside of us. So observing our breath, there's all kinds of breath work and many different things. One of my favorites is the 4-7-8 kind of box breathing. Can have a really nice effect. You inhale for 4, you hold for 7, you exhale for 8. For some people, not everybody, you have to do it and notice, you know, what happens for your body. But for a lot of people, that can start to kind of regulate their nervous system. But really, with noticing breath, I find that when we're grounded, the breath knows what to do. So it doesn't always have to be, again, in this achievement, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do this, whatever, 40-minute breath work. It can just be feel the ground and allow your breath to do what it naturally knows what to do without you controlling, manipulating, forcing. Uniting with others. So the power of community, I'm very neutral with 12-step groups. I've been in the past. I don't currently go. I often encourage my gray area drinking clients, especially if they're resistant, check it out. I'm incredibly neutral. I respect and understand people's resistance to the language, the resistance to God, peace, all of that. I have, my opinions, doesn't bother me, but it's not about my opinion. It's about what do they notice and what happens for them when they go to a 12-step meeting. So I'm always kind of cueing back and, of working with people. It's not about my opinion or what works for me, but what works for them. So the power of community, sitting with other people face to face, the polyvagal nerve, the mirror neurons, the toning, eye to eye contact, the vocal tone, it calms our nervous system. So I don't care if it's 12-step or a knitting group or Zen, meditation group, that community and that group support is very, very helpful. So I encourage, people to add that in, and we work on that as kind of some of their action steps. The replenishing with food, this is a huge, workshop and big training. This is where the neurotransmitters come in, the different, food that we're eating and different supplements. A lot of what I work with is working with that internal chemistry, particularly GABA, serotonin, dopamine, and acetylcholine. And there's foods that can boost those. I do assessments with people of, looking of what's deficient. We all have, when we're squeezed with stress, there's going to be that thing that we deplete more. So a lot of gray area drinkers deplete GABA. It's very common. It's that anxiety piece. So then what are foods that can boost GABA? What are supplements to boost? Lifestyle practices, and targeting that and being very specific, and also working with the gut bacteria, kind of fortifying that healthy gut, because the bacteria in our intestines are the raw materials that manufacture those neurotransmitters. So there's a lot of customized work with replenishing with food, but when we physically feel better, we emotionally feel better. So it's an important piece. Initiating movement, in Nourish, is, again, it's a lot of that bottom up. So, starting with the body, but not putting the body in like a flee response. So, sometimes pedaling really, really hard on the Peloton or going for long runs, what are you running from? What are you mentally fleeing from? I like to slow people down if I can. Exercise is wonderful. It boosts the dopamine, it boosts the serotonin, but initiating movement to regulate the nervous system is often connecting the breath with the movement. So slower practices, Tai Chi, Qigong, a slower yoga, a slow walk in nature, and noticing how that is. And some people may be like, I can't stand it. I can't stand to slow down to that level. Totally fine. It may change, but so, we do what feels good to them. But from a regulating standpoint, I like slower movement with the breath. This isn't about weight loss or, sculpting kind of the perfect fitness plan. It's about regulating the nervous system. Sitting in stillness can bring in the relaxation component, but also the spiritual component. So if people want to bring in prayer, devotion, whatever type of meditation, just sitting on the grass. But when we sit in stillness, it starts to help the nervous system be more still. And then harnessing creativity, I like to also call it the ING activity. So painting, gardening, reading, cooking, often things, that we can do with our hands. And like I mentioned a minute ago, our palms have a very direct connection right up to the brain. And so like kinetic sand, knitting, the yarn and the needles, drawing, painting, but something, because, we scroll all the time and we type on the computer, but it's disconnecting kind of that palm to hand and the nervous system. And there's a depleted nutrient there. There's nourishment that's being missed. So I'm a big proponent of adding stuff in. We are already taking away alcohol. So now let's add in these other pieces. Not because I say so, or not because it's, the thing that you should do or have to do, but when you add it in, notice what happens and how does that start to shift something in your body, in your nervous system? Because when we drink, it shifts things in our body and in our nervous system. So that's, a quick overview that there's a lot to dig really deep into all of that. But I know some of you are having to jump off. And I'd be happy to, and I'd love to take any questions about that side of things.
I would just like to say, I loved every second of this. And Jolene, what's so interesting, and I'll just share a fact, I'm doing EMDR right now. So I have a therapist that I've been working with, and it's so interesting because I just did my first reprocessing yesterday. We've been working together for like 4 months. She finally feels like I'm done with all of the stuff, you know, the denials and moving things to the wrong places and everything else. And we got my container and we've got my stuff and everything else. But what's so interesting is when we were done with it, and by the way, holy cow, but when we were done with it, she brought me right back to those senses again. And she made me ground myself again and do the visuals, the taste, the smell, and everything else. And at the time, I wasn't quite sure why. I thought that she was just trying to kind of get the way that I always look at it is, okay, you're getting your mind to move to something else and you're getting out of this and into something else. But what I'm realizing now, and it's so interesting that you said that, because when I was before recovery, I was an obsessive runner. I was an obsessive exerciser. And now, like, I just can't wait to do my breathing, my yoga. I'm a terrible meditator. It's just not where, you know, my brain, I have anxiety. It just doesn't work for me. But I find that when I'm doing certain things, I've been able to find for myself what works. And it's just so, I love the fact that you're so open-minded for it. That's part of why I became like a recovery coach as well, is because I don't think there is just one path. You know, AA worked for me. Would it work for me today? I'm not sure. You know, I think that I would probably do something more like an all recovery or a women in recovery. You know, I'd saved my life, but I feel like it's so important to see all of these different things. And when you bring in the grounding work and the processing and the ability to really find what makes you happy, it makes such a big difference. And then you also brought up the whole, you know, in tune with nature. That is a huge component for me as well. So I just love everything that you just said. And I can say the proof is in the pudding that after 15 years of not drinking, what really helped me was, yes, the 12 steps helped me a great deal, but it was all the other work around it that made me live my life, a life of my wildest dreams. So that's what makes me happy. You know, the putting down the drink was one thing, but then all of this other work with you're doing, everyone. And I, you know, I can say that there's outcomes to prove it. I'm here. It's fabulous. So I just wanted to thank you on that respect. And I also wanted to say that from the gray area drinking, it's so fascinating. My husband has a friend who's not drinking for dry January. And, you know, my husband said to me, my husband drinks, you know, he's not an alcoholic, but he definitely likes to have his drink, and I'm fine with that. But his friend is struggling with this month. He's really struggling with it. And I sort of scoff because it's not me he's talking to. And I'm like, well, you know, that might mean he has a problem. If he's having a really hard time for a month, maybe he should consider looking into that. But a lot of people still don't understand that. And they still think that if they can get through 30 days, they're fine. And so that's why I thought this was so important for dry January, because I hate dry January more than anything. I think it's such a ludicrous situation. And it's a little bit like when I worked in eating disorders too. It's like, you can't just do something for 3 weeks. It has to become intuitive. And so I think the idea about, you know, the trying to not to drink, it sort of seems like people are trying to prove to themselves that they can actually go through 30, 31 days. And that means they're okay. So I love it. And I love the fact that we were able to bring this in today. So I just wanted to thank you and say everything you're saying is just like, it's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. I would love to see.
Jolene, what do you use for the GABA? When I was trying to help people and stuff, trying to find a GABA that really helps, because I've heard different theories about you really can't control GABA with supplements and blah, 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 blah. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, first I'm all about biochemical individuality. And so, you know, having the full history. So what other medications are on board? What's the full history? You know, getting a sense of kind of their fight, flight, freeze, like so, you know, having their history is very, very helpful to kind of, instead of just, you know, shooting from the hip. But in general, you know, I can speak kind of in general. So you can take GABA itself as a supplement. And sometimes that can be, people like, you know, what do you think of this? Because some people are like, I hear it doesn't work. And then some people are like, I have good results. So we can have a leaky brain the way we can have a leaky gut. And so it may not, cross because we're inflamed and, so there's other systemic things to work on. So for some people, they may take GABA and feel absolutely nothing depending on their brain, kind of blood, what's going on. Or, they have great results. So you can take straight GABA, number one. Some of my favorite things, I like L-theanine for a GABA booster. And I'll actually just open up, early, not drinking. I would just open up those capsules and put the powder, just let it, sublingually go right under my tongue. So, I do that like twice a day or something. So L-theanine can have a nice calming effect. There's many herbs. Early on, I use passion flower, lemon balm can be very calming. Holy basil is an Ayurvedic herb and it's an adaptogen. So if your cortisol's low, it can bring it up. If your cortisol's high, it's that regulating balance. Kava, can be, and again, it can be different controversy like about your liver and things. But with all of this, if you're taking it as directed, we're not taking anything addictively, more is not better, but, as directed, like one capsule or one tea bag or something, chamomile. So all of those things from a supplement standpoint can be very calming and help to boost GABA and help keep GABA boosted. So alcohol, we feel like we get that GABA boost, it actually just depletes it further and then it's this vicious cycle. But those herbs and supplements can boost and can hold. The one thing I'll say about kind of neurotransmitter nutrition stuff is the foundation with all of it is blood sugar. So if blood sugar is erratic and people aren't eating or they're eating a lot of sugar, drinking a lot of sugar, it makes it really, we're going to feel all the neurotransmitter kind of deficiencies. So stabilizing blood sugar right out of the gate can help our mood and kind of our neurotransmitter, how we're feeling just in and of itself, just eating regularly and not having this up and down swing. And once that's kind of there, I start there, then we can put in something like L-theanine or some other things.
Okay.
So a comment, no need on the dry January. It helps a lot of folks to get started on questioning their alcohol use. Yeah, I agree. And again, it's a controversial thing. I hear you, Laura. I have a friend in this alcohol-free space. She's a writer and she's written about, how it's kind of an insult to the sobriety community to do a 30-day stint. She feels very strongly about that. So I definitely see both sides. And from a gray area drinking side, I'm just interested in what's the nervous system going to do. So it's very interesting data for me to see, is somebody able to go that full 30 days or not? And I'm also really glad that I had periods. I had 30 days, I had 8 months, I had, all of that added up. And I'm glad I had those periods, even if some of them were short, as opposed to just drinking straight through. So I do think taking a break, even if it's 30 days, it's not a lot, but it's given the brain and the body somewhat of a reprieve, even if February 1st, people are right back at it. So what else can I answer for people?
We have about 5 minutes left. So if anybody has what I'll call a burning desire, now would be a great time to ask the question. I do want to just do a couple of notes, Jolene. So we will be sending out the recorded presentation within, I would say, a week, as long as we don't have to do any edits, etc. And we'll send it to everybody that was on this call. We also did start a YouTube channel for Gallus Medical Detox. So this, as well as Bonnie Brennan's presentation, is on that. So if anybody needs any help with that, please feel free to email me and I can send you the direct link to that, or you can just look it up by searching Gallus Medical Detox inside of YouTube. And then I just want to thank Jolene so much. Oh, somebody would like to know how they can get info and pricing for your coaching, Jolene.
Yeah, so I'd love to share how to resources, how to find me. So grayareadrinkers.com is my website, and my coaching page is there for one-on-one coaching, which I call Craving Brain coaching. So everything is listed. I also have a 30-day sober choice program, which is just a DIY self-paced program to go through. You could even be a couple weeks, months out, but you're wanting support with sugar cravings and social situations and sleep and hormones. And so they're recorded videos no longer than 15 minutes with lots of resources and materials That's on my website. And then I also train other coaches and practitioners and my next training will be February 15th. So it's practitioners who want to coach and work with gray area drinkers. And the people who go through are, they're already recovery coaches, they're health coaches, they're nurses, therapists. So they already have that foundational training. And now they just want this nuanced professional development to really go deep into, asking the questions, things like what's the longest period you've gone, and we go even deeper than that of where your antenna really need to go up. And then we do 2 weeks of the biochemistry, neurotransmitters, a week of the somatic work, the habit change, and then every Friday I do case studies of actual gray area drinking clients that I've had. And so we put into practice everything we talk about at the beginning of the week and do the case studies. So grayareadrinkers.com is where you can find me.
Awesome, Jolene. Thank you so much. And if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to email me. You should have my email information. If you don't, it's laurah@gallusdetox.com. It should also be on the email that we sent out to you. So please feel free to reach me. I can get you in contact with Jolene if you have other questions. And with that, it looks like we're at the top of the bottom of the half hour. So I just want to say thank you again, Jolene. I appreciate you. I appreciate everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in our next presentation.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you guys for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.